Welcome to the first Linkage seminar of 2022. I'm Amy O'Hara. I work in the Massive Data Institute at the McCourt School of Public Policy. If it's okay with folks, we're going to be recording this because so many people that couldn't join us right now are going to be interested in learning about the exciting Decennial Linkage project that our speaker today will be telling us about. And I am delighted to introduce, and she will introduce herself much more. She has promised, she said she has slides, my former colleague at the Census Bureau, Katie Genadek. Katie, take it away. Tell us about whatever you feel like doing, and people can interrupt you with questions and ask questions in the chat, and I will point them out if you miss them.
That would be great, because I can get talking really fast because I do get very excited. So just yell. Feel free to pop in. I'm not at all turned off by that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try and share.
And it worked
at the beginning. Are you seeing the full thing? Let's see. Let's try this way. I think that'll look better. Woohoo! Hi everyone. There's so many of you on. This is fantastic. I'm so excited to be here. As I told Izzy, who manages this, Izzy Youngs, that I actually have never made one of these live. They've always mismatched with my schedule, but I have watched a number of the videos. So I think it is fantastic they're recorded. It always freaks me out when there's recording, in general, but it's been really nice to see other people's and they've been great. Very cool. So I'm here today to talk about the Decennial Census Digitization and Linkage project. As Amy said, my name is Katie Genadek and she nailed my last name beautifully. I'm at the US Census Bureau and the University of Colorado Boulder. This is a sort of joint presentation that I've been building in the works and usually presenting with my collaborator and co-PI, Trent Alexander, who's at the University of Michigan. I don't think he can actually be here today. He might be able to pop on at some point, but this did not work with his schedule. Schedules are hard to overline. So as I promised, a little bit about myself. So I previously to working for the Census Bureau worked managing the IPUMS USA project and worked on dissemination for IPUMS, which is at the University of Minnesota. And actually Trent hired me there many, many years ago. And we worked on our first data recovery project, I think starting in 06 or 07. Tim just put a picture of his mug up. That's great. Oh, that's a beautiful one too. Those are one of my favorites. Yes, the IPUMS iMugs. I don't have one of those. They're gorgeous. And so we sort of have this long history of working with historical data. We're recovering the parts of the 1960 census back then. And then, as Amy said, Amy and Trent hired me at the US Census Bureau a little before the 2020 census. And I started by working in the FSRDCs as well. And this is actually the Colorado census. I actually have a framed thing of this. Oh, that's kind of how geeky I am. And that I ran the Boulder RDC. So I also work really closely still with FSRDC researchers, with my local FSRDC, but also trying to make data better for research done in the FSRDC. And that's really sort of the backbone of this whole project, is trying to improve the linked data available for researchers around the country. And where I do that, so I'm housed in the Economic Directorate at the US Census Bureau, and I'm on a really neat team where we're able to leverage data science and sort of novel data to improve bureau-wide how we collect, produce, and disseminate data. So even though we're in the Econ Directorate, I'm talking about decennial data today. We work across the whole Bureau with lots of different people. And it's just a really amazing, neat team, which has been incredibly useful. And as I go forward in this talk, you're going to hear about the different statisticians, data scientists, software engineers that have all come into play in making this happen, particularly in the last year or two. So a little overview about what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you a big overview of the longitudinal infrastructure of census data, linked census data in the US, and where this project fits into that. I'll talk a little bit about record linkage at the Census Bureau and how we do that and how that matters for then our recovery project. Talk about what's missing in this and how we're going to build out that infrastructure based on a pilot project that was started back in about 2015 when Amy was there. And then I'll discuss what we're doing right now, what we're in the middle of on the Decennial Census Digitization and Linkage project. And at the end, I'll talk just a little bit about access, how you can access these data, the data available now, and when you'll be able to access these data. There's Amy's first question. So linked census data from 1850 to 1940, this is a long time in the making. So right now, these data are public. The 1940 data went public in 2012, which is almost a decade ago now. And there's been a long history of linkage with them. This linkage was often done by hand in small samples. There's been some more automated efforts recently as full count data have come out. The older samples have pretty small linkage rates. They were often really targeted to these samples, creating nationally representative link samples. There's been big innovations in this in the past 5 years using complete count genealogical data, vital records to improve this. So using the full count census data and other information to improve the individual level linkage across these files. So from the modern linkage data though, so from 1950 to the present, all of these census data are protected by Title 13, and they're held in a restricted access environment at the US Census Bureau. However, many of them are linkable over time using our unique linkage keys, which I'll talk about a little. The linkage strategies are actually pretty similar to the historical data, where we're using sort of name, address, family information to link individuals over time, birth date and age. However, because the data is, there's a few things going on that make our linkage rates generally a little higher in the more modern data. The data is higher quality, it's just been preserved better because it's more recent. We also have some more linkage resources. So in this modern data, we have a lot of administrative data that help us do this. And I have a great example that I'll show you of that. The other thing to note, though, is like a lot of this historical linkage is doing for the purpose of research. We're at the Census Bureau, we're linking decennial census data for our agency goals. Not a byproduct of it is research, but we're really doing it to ensure that we count the whole country, to improve our processes and production within the Census Bureau. So just like administrative and data in general, that's not made for research. Often the linked data can have a bit of that too. So how we do this, and I think this has been hit some in these talks, but I don't know, I like how I talk about it too. So the Census Bureau has significant authority under Title 13 to get sort of data to help with our record linkage. As I mentioned, we have all of these administrative records, and we have the ability in law here to do that. And we do it again to help our production processes. This is just a list, sort of some of the data sources held at the Census Bureau that we're able to use for our work done. And again, that helps impact our linkage. So we call it the Census Data Linkage Infrastructure. This is built out. Researchers can access this now. You can use our linked data. We do it to improve our surveys and processes. We actually started capturing names in the 2000 census with the explicit purpose to keep it from having like double counting people, to improve our enumeration in the decennial census. And then even within the census processing, unplanned, we ended up using it to help assign and impute different like ethnicities, Hispanic ethnicities, gender, things like that. It ended up really coming into play in ways they didn't expect, but it also allows for this linkage. So this is sort of to support research as part of this, but this is why we do it. How we link records at the Census Bureau is that we take all cases in a survey or a census, and we link them to a composite file built primarily of administrative records. We use common record linkage keys like linking, just like anyone else, name, date of birth, sex, place of residence, sometimes SSN, depending on what's in the data that we're linking. We use sort of standard techniques for data cleaning and probabilistic matching. Right, so we're using common name units, we're blocking on these different things. We're doing it's very straightforward, basic linkage. And then the match cases, when we feel like they're a good enough match, we assign a protected identification key to them. And we call that a pick. Any data that's been assigned a pick can be linked at the individual level to another data set that's been assigned a pick. And this is how we manage our linkage within the Census Bureau, which is a little different than the historical decennial data, where there's different options for that. So right now, what we have when we look at the decennial censuses, if we look at the 2010 census, about 91% of respondents were assigned a pick. The 2000 census, closer to 89. The 1940 census, which I'll discuss here in a minute, is about 41%. Again, this is also to be expected. As I said, we're building on this administrative records composite. Anyone here who is a history data buff knows that SSA started issuing SSNs in 1936. That said, going back, right, we do have births before that, a lot of people getting SSNs, but in 1940, there's a lot of people alive that never got an SSN. And because our PICs rely so heavily on having an SSN or an ITIN in the modern data, the earned income tax number, but that's not so common back then, you really have to be in our composite to get a PIC. And we're working on 1942, so I think that'll get. So in general, what this means, hearing about these SSNs and what we have is that it's easiest to assign PICs to taxpayers, to workers, to people on Medicare, to individuals we can find consistently that are getting assistance, to men who have ever registered for selective service. It's a lot harder to assign PICs to mobile and transient populations, right? So people that don't have a stable address, residents without an SSN or an ITIN, and children not claimed on tax forms. This actually comes up a lot with infants. I have a lot of work where I'm trying to look at birthing and babies and infants, and they're tough to get in administrative records in general, going way back. Like I can see it back to the 60s to now. And people actually have trouble, I think, kind of remembering when they had a baby. We see that in the ACS all the time, that whether you had a baby in the last year sometimes means a couple of years. So this is actually straight from Amy O'Hara, who's on the thing. This is from the 2010 match study, and I love this map because I think this shows something really important and sort of a glaring representation of where administrative data gaps are. It highlights the importance of census data and why we worked so hard to collect, because you can see here in the purple areas is when about 95% or more of the people in that area were assigned a PIC, or the respondents to the census. However, once we get down to orange, it's less than 80%. That yellow is 80 to 85, where you see the big gaps, and you see a huge, right, there's a geographic component to this, which is tied in to how we assign these PICs and whatnot. So this is an important thing about, linkage in general, when we think about who's missing in air and all of that. So I think this is a beautiful highlight of that. So I'm going to run through this very cool example I have from the 1940 census. So we obtained at the Census Bureau the 1940 census from IPUMS in 2015. I was actually at IPUMS at the time working with the 1940 census, and now it's here and we work on it here. In order to bring it in and link it within this linkage infrastructure so that we can build out and have a longer sort of time frame of linkages for families. And you can see in this, when we got the 1940 census, what we have there is name, age, and sex. And we have similar things in the 2000 census, right? We have name, date of birth, and sex. And if we match those directly, we've done a little rough estimate of doing this. We think we get about 2 million links. So 2 million out of this 132 million, we think if we just linked on those three things directly over this giant time span, right, over 60 years, that we get about 2 million. And the nice thing about our record linkage system within the Census Bureau is that we didn't have to do that. So instead, we took the 1940 census and we linked it directly to our administrative records composite. And then we used state and country of birth, and we also used parents' names when we had them in 1940, and also in the SSA data where we have parents' names for when you apply for your SSN. And when we did that, we get about 54 million links right now. We did the same thing right with 2000, just like I showed you before. We assigned PICs to 2000, and we did that using, in that data, address, which we don't have very well digitized for 1940, but we do in 2000 in the administrative records composite. So for that, right, they got about almost 250 million links to R54. When you link the two using the PICs, you get 26 million. So this, if every link was possible, we think right now we get about 41 million links, right? We're estimating based on death there, who we expect to be alive in 2000 from 1940. So we're getting, right, again, sort of in this area, when we link to 2000, more than half, so more than 50%. And it actually starts to look really good when we look at younger people. So here is an age pyramid looking at the PICs assigned by age in the 1940 census and gender. They're actually pretty similar across. We get really high rates for women, nearly as high for men. But you can see there are those dark bars going out. We get a lot more for people living at home with their parents. So for young people, we actually go upwards. I think under 18, we get about 72% of under age 17 we're able to assign a PIC to, and the majority of those we can link to 2000. Again, and we expect them to be alive in 2000. So that's part of it. So this was really exciting. This is amazing work. There's phenomenal research going on with this in the RDCs right now. I get to see the new sort of requests for this often coming in. I love it. They're doing fascinating work, and any of you can go do that too. So that's fantastic. But it also is, you're already like, well, thinking this, like, we have the 60-year gap. What's going on, right? So right now we have the IPMS link samples from 1850 to 1930. Oops, sorry, 1940. And then we have 1940 linked up to what we've got. In addition to IPMS linking the samples, people have linked them on their own. MBR is making crosswalks through these years available. Also, the family tree data is at ICPSR, the group out of BYU doing that. So a lot of people are linking those older data at the individual level. You can bring in those links to the Census Bureau from 1930 back, link them to our 1940 file with pics, and link those forward to 2000. But again, there's this big gap. There's a big gap from 1950 to 1990. The 1950 data go public in April, the images, and we are in the works of hoping to get that data like we did with 1940. Actually, right before this call, Ancestry called me. I need to call them back. Everyone's getting excited for 50. That's the bottom line. But 60 through 90 pose a harder situation, right? This is a more difficult missing link. And why is this difficult? Well, for one, the microdata from these files, even though we have the microdata, which is pretty amazing. So that's also a product of really advanced technology back in 1960 that NIST and the Census Bureau created together to create microdata that was then tabulated. So we have those microdata and you can use those for research, but they don't include names, which is pretty essential here, as you've seen through the linkage, for assigning our picks. Also, the names were handwritten on census forms. So they weren't typed into boxes. It's often cursive. The census forms are stored, the pictures of the forms, on 250,000 microfilm reels. And if we do the numbers, we're talking about 850 million handwritten names across microfilm reels. So this is truly a massive data project. And with this group, this is a lot of names. Those historical names, the 1790 to 1850 in total, 650 million. These 4 years have more names by a lot than those do. The forms and data are also highly restricted. These are protected by Title 13. They are in a secure facility, 2 different secure facilities to keep them safe, one with the National Archives, one with us at the Census Bureau. So we also have to work on them in a really protected environment. And the biggest question, the biggest number one question is, can we capture these names, right? That is the most, can we capture 850 million names? So in order to assess that, back in the 2015 era too, we started at the Census Bureau the 1990 Census Pilot. And really with the question, can we really capture these handwritten names effectively? Typing in this many names is sort of insane, right? It's like reprocessing 4 censuses. The historical data were often, all of those were either hand entered by volunteers, by individuals paid around the world. It was also a huge operation that took many decades as well. So this we want to do. Can we effectively, both cost-wise and time-wise, capture these names? And that's what the 1990 pilot sought to answer. This is what, again, to give you an idea of this problem, the 2020 census, if you filled out the paper form, which hopefully you didn't, you went online and used that really nice, really cool online app. But if you printed it in, you had a little box, right? And we do use optical character recognition to see those boxes, but we've designed this form for our homegrown, like custom OCR to read those bubbles. Likewise, the American Community Survey has these nice boxes. It says, please print the name. And again, these forms have been custom designed for this. Here's the 1990 census. This is an actual picture of like a scan coming off of microfilm of what they look like. Again, and also the 1940 census there too is even like a little bit clearer. You have a full name. So this is what we're trying to do. Can we capture this? So we scanned the original microfilm. We created truth data. Then we conducted the OCR, optical character recognition, and finally evaluated the output. This was all to see, like, can we get names high quality enough to assign a pick? We don't expect them to be as good as handwritten names, as typed names, which also have error. So I'll step back to note on the side, 1940 names have been entered twice, all right, by 2 different groups. I have only seen one. I'm working very hard to get the second one at the Census Bureau. And so we are hoping to do another round of assigning picks to that data and try to incorporate this new set of names, because I've heard rumors that they might be slightly better. And I've also heard this rumor that others have disputed, that they match only 60% of the time. That 40% of the time, the names do not match between the hand keying. So we know hand keying, that just even the regular writing, like the enumerator writing isn't always great, right? So that the hand keying can't be great. So that comes with AIR 2, which we should remember when we're using linked data. But we also know the OCR won't be even as high quality as that we expect it to be somewhat lower quality. We just need to assess if we can use it for linkage. So this is where they're stored. This is an actual picture of the bins containing microfilm. If some of you are having flashbacks to like libraries of your youth, this is like, right, where they like open and there's drawers of microfilm reels in there. And this is what an image of the 1990 census looks like in full on the reel. This is a much better image. This is like a beautiful one that I got off of paper, but they look basically like this. During the pilot, we had 2 different scanning machines. I'll get to show you pictures of our new operation, but here they're scanning reels, they're scanning. So basically what it does, these machines are like sliding microfilm through and taking a digital picture of every single image and then moving it to a computer to store it. So it's laborious. And here was like the really exciting OCR. It's like my talent of writing loops, right? This is just like working on a computer in a basement.
Katie, I'm gonna interrupt you there.
Yeah.
That setup was a nightmare to get through IT security, because they needed to bring in a bare metal machine and it could not touch the census network. So we had to plug it into an outlet in the basement of the Census Bureau and then monitor the people that were down there working. It was really cold. You should have had a thermometer in the picture.
Next time, except for we don't have to do that this time because we're working on the census network, but that has come up with all of its own stuff, as anyone can imagine. We'll get there too, kind of fun stuff. So we did create ground truth data too, so that the machine learning could train, and we withheld some so we could test. And that was the biggest, right? The actual test of the OCR. We had a few groups come in and do it, but we really only had one that did well enough to consider. So of course, the one team that came in like, oh, we're going to get 100%. We're great. We're so amazing. They got downwards of like 30% accuracy, and we weren't going to look at anything over 50. So for the one group that did do well, how often did the OCR results match the sort of truth data? For age, we got a 95% match. So they grabbed age, that was like a number to see how they would do with numbers. For last name, we got an exact match of 82%. And for first name, we got an exact match of 75%. We provided them with name dictionaries, full US name dictionaries from SSA to do this work with. And there are a lot fewer last names than first names in the dictionaries too.
And they had to pare down the dictionary. I remember that being a big deal.
Yep, because it's a lot of names. And basically the majority of names, like 95% of names, you can get in like half of them, right? That there's all these like singles and misspellings. Now, when we apply sort of Jaro or Yarrow-Winkler string comparator, which is really commonly used, right, in the linkage thing, then we get an even higher last name match. So this is again getting at like the little misspellings, typos, things like that coming in. And we felt like this was sufficiently high. We've been able to assign picks to these cases at a very high rate to push forward with the larger project of doing all of these censuses and years. So that brings us to the Decennial Census Digitization and Linkage project, where our big picture here, what we've started doing, we're scanning the microfilm reels for all of the censuses. So I should for anyone that's really into it. So we have the 1990 long forms and short forms. For 1980, we just have the short form data. For 70 and 60, likewise, we just have short form because it has everyone. It was sort of how they did the censuses, and the National Archives has all of them. So we are scanning National Archives is also scanning those other images. We don't need them for this project, but we're also going to be giving these scans to the National Archives so they don't have to scan them all as well, so that you can get a digital image of this when it comes out 72 years after it was taken. So after that, we'll be using OCR, the optical character recognition, and we'll use optical mark recognition to capture other fields so that we digitize the PII in these fields from the scanned images. Then we can link that PII to the already digitized data that we've been using for research and create PIC crosswalks for 1960 through 1990. So when I say in about five-ish years, that's what I would like to have done by then, is 4 PIC crosswalks for 60, 70, and 80, 90. At a minimum, there's a lot of other things, that are happening along with this, but that's the big goal. Support for this project, for the 1990 project too, that was supported by the National Science Foundation, the National Academies, the Carnegie Foundation, under the American Opportunity Study. A lot of work went into that. There was also additional support following the 1990 pilot to make sure we could really build this out for all the other years. And that came from Stanford University and the Hewlett Foundation. Currently, there's funding from the Balmer Group, the Overdeck Foundation, Arnold Ventures, the Gates Foundation, JPB Foundation, and the National Science Foundation. After the 1990 project, we estimated that it would cost nearly $40 million to do this because of changes in storage costs, which is a pretty great technological advancement, even in the past 5 years. We're closer now to about 25 million. So we've been able to raise that, and the Census Bureau has put in a considerable amount of that, like a huge amount of that. Also, they've supported it obviously with staff and whatnot too, but they've contributed a lot of funds for this as well. And specifically the Econ Directorate, which is surprising to many, in addition to supporting this work, also does, that's where the data capture for 2020 happens. So in Econ, we do the data capture for the Census Bureau, and we do the production record linkage for the Census Bureau. So we assign PICs within our directorate as well. This is a partnership. We have a joint statistical project agreement with the University of Michigan, as well as Brown University and Harvard University. So folks at ICPSR and Opportunity Insights are heavily involved with this work, and also getting the funds to support this work and the output. So microfilm scanning began last summer. This is a picture of our operation. So right now as we speak at this moment, there are 12 people working those stations scanning all day long. So they scan images, and we are right now through almost 50% of the 1990 census. So we've been clipping along, making huge amounts of digital images, and huge amounts. We'll get to that in a minute too. We've partnered with the Information Sciences Institute at the University of California to perform the OCR. So this is the team that did really well in 1990. We're continuing to work together. And we also have the 2020 data capture team that works in Econ and R&M working on the OMR. So this actually, I think did I do the numbers of this? We have over 110 years of Census Bureau service people with that experience working on the OMR. So I have a team here of people who worked on those original censuses, like the 1970 and 1980 data capture, still now working on the OMR. So it's pretty
That sounds impressive, but that could actually be like 2 or 3 people.
It's literally that the 110 is 2 and the other person is adding like 3. There's 3 people. So it's amazing. They're incredible. And I'm so grateful that they're able to give their insights and work. And we've discovered things that I've read that whole 1990 procedural history, and I've learned more from people that actually worked on it. So it's been gold. It's been incredible. So that's fantastic. And in addition to that, we've created a new open source application for keying training and truth data. So this is a team member on my Econ team that I talked about, a data scientist named Cecile Murray, who built an open source application for us. So we're making this data available on GitHub, or the code for this, so that we can adapt it for other things. And I've actually already started another project where I think we're going to try and adapt it for data entry for that. So we're really excited about that, that we're keying truth data and also trying to do this, create new software for everyone. So that was pretty cool. I mentioned this was really big. We're at the Massive Data Group. I figured I had to show a version of this this is our current data flow diagram. We are creating 4 petabytes of images. So we really have shot into a whole new level of data storage. And we're using an on-premise and sort of cloud solution for storing and processing these. That is really, I mean, I think this is really only possible now because we're able to do this. And so even for like any organization, 4 petabytes is a lot of data. I feel like the satellite image people, I just heard one of them talking and they had more, obviously, but we are flowing lots of data and capturing data from this huge amount of images. We are going to assign PICs. Our plan is to use standard Census Bureau linkage. We're really in the middle of this production phase, so we have not turned to linkage, even though this is the linkage talk, that much. But we do know, we've done obviously some pilots on this. We've been working on it. We're making use of the 1969 through 1989 IRS 1040 Full Universe files. And these are kind of magical. I mean, this is also like a magical thing that's making this happen. These were found at the Census Bureau. There's a full universe every 5 years in there that that IRS doesn't even have right now. We're like trying to give them back to them. So it's really, this is going to make this much easier because this table is kind of a lot. But all I'm really showing here is that like using this administrative records, the ability to use the census geography and the administrative record geography and the characteristics from the census and the administrative records, we think it's really going to improve our ability to pick these. So we're sort of building out our administrative records composite with information from that time period. And that's really, really exciting. I mean, again, it's kind of amazing. Like we're so lucky these files survived and are there and were found. So to the people before me, that's incredible. We've already been harmonizing the addresses in the IRS data to census geography. If there's any geographers on here, you know very, very well that geographic harmonization in these geographies are hard. And so we're trying to take these addresses and fit them in so that we can use these data into the best way possible. So they're like sort of our maximum abilities to get PICs on there.
Katie, you're going to talk about KidLink at all?
I mean, I'm not, but I can.
Could you flip back to your last slide?
I mean, I would like
up arrow. No. Oh, sorry. Okay. So something interesting about the found data from those old 1040s is that unlike today's 1040s, where you have to name your children if you are claiming them as dependents, back then, when you look at this, it's like, oh, cool, you got name. Well, you only have parent name. And so you would be like, those parents have 7 children. Those parents have 2 children. Those parents have 1 child. They have none. And so you're not going to have the kids' names, but SSA does have mom's name, dad's name, kid's name, except they don't share with census the socials for all of them. So that's even more probabilistic matching that needs to happen.
Correct. So right now we're working with a team where we are trying to use those old data. So we have the number of dependents, right? So we have a household, we'll have a mom name and a dad name. And right, we think they have 3 kids. And we're using that information along with what you're saying, that information, the name information and the numeton, to try and assign PICs to those kids. And like to figure out who those kids are. Basically, we have, right, their address, their parents' name information, but we don't have their name. So it's like PIC assignment without name. We're also using, how we're using the address is a little complex too, right? We don't know where you live in the numeton. We're trying to do some things with birthplace, really start with the littlest, the youngest of children, and so like if you were only born within that year or two, to get some of those and then move to the next. You're right, it is not as good, right? It's not the same as our current data, but we're trying to maximize it.
Yeah, leverage. And if the data are that old, you can use the first 3 numbers of the social and the middle 2 numbers based on where in the country the number was issued and things like that.
Yep. So we're trying to get creative.
I'm going to interrupt you here with stuff. I've been keeping an eye on the chat.
Yeah, there's a problem.
It seems like a good time to ask the questions that Terry Ann and Tim asked. Terry Ann asked, with respect to coverage of administrative data, do you know the extent to which there is differential coverage? And I think right now, when you're talking about this mountain of 1040s and this mountain of SSA data, it's a good time to talk about that a bit.
What our coverage is. Yeah, so actually I have a team. I've been working with a group where we've been trying to document these 1040 data in particular. So we know, I mean, we have really good ideas about the census coverage, right? I mean, these census data, like we have them, we just don't have the names, right? But we have like really good ideas of who would like, right? The like great tables and data saying what we have there. It does look like the 1040 data is the full universe. So like that is something like we checked on. So everyone that filed. We do obviously know that, right, there are definitely people that don't file, that don't have to file. We think that does change a bit over time. So we're really working right now to get that documented and well understood. I don't think it's well understood. I mean, I don't think anyone knows. So yesterday I was looking at tables of, right, the 19, right, by state, like the 1979, like data, how many people we have when we count everyone with a PIC, and their kids, people underneath, when we look at them by age, when we look at them by race that we have in the new minute, how do they compare to the census estimates? So I think that's still a work in progress. We know, just like the administrative map that I showed you from 2010, that it's not going to be the same. But we have a lot. And we do catch, I mean, the new minute has, right, like a lot of people in the US have an SSN, or even get one if they're not a citizen, right, if they work here. And even going forward, the ITINs that we've built back with, right, sort of into our reference file going forward, I think we have a pretty complete administrative records composite.
You guys looked into, I know that back when I was involved with this project, we were looking into how SSA started issuing the requirement for having an SSN, and it excluded people that were agricultural workers. It basically had these excluded classes that would have had the group of people with SSNs having a very different racial makeup than the general population. And then similarly, what you were just saying about the way that the filing requirement changes over time probably has some people more in the data than others.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious, like, have you looked into whether non-white people are not in these data sources?
Not specifically. I mean, I think we're doing that, like we're digging into that. I think in terms of SSA and the SSNs, I think that hits, it's so historical that most people eventually got an SSN. So I have run the numbers going back to like 1910 on the births, and like we are capturing nearly it starts to go down, right, when you go back, but the births, just like in the vital statistics. And in the modern data, it actually goes a little above that, right? Which is what we'd expect. So we know we're missing some, right? Just for what you're saying, that even if it's doing the same amount, because other people are getting, like, that aren't born in the US are getting SSNs. So it's not perfect by any means. But in our work looking at going at like the births back in time, I got pretty well convinced that a lot of people got an SSN at some point, right? Even if they didn't right away.
I think that was the easy part of the question. The hard part's about the IRS.
Yeah, the IRS data, I mean, we're just working on it now. I don't have an answer to that. We are digging into it as we speak. Like, we are trying to see what's there, right? And what, and get it documented so other people can see it and think about it. And it will impact our picking for back then. But what we're hoping to do, this leads really beautifully to my next slide, is sort of also investigate further entity resolutions for respondents without SSNs. So, right, using the names, just like we would with the historical data, link across these censuses once we have them all, and see if we can find people who don't have an SSN, but we can assign some kind of a new PIC to, because we see them over time in the census. So we actively, like, this is written for our grants, we have plans to do that. Additionally, a kind of a cool thing that we're planning on doing, and we're working with, is we are bringing in the PSID, maybe not all of it. I know, like, Tim's looking excited there because of their agreements. So it's a small sample, right, I believe, of people who are deceased at this moment, but bringing those in and assigning PICs and seeing how it, like, using them, right, to help us understand the air and help us see how we're doing, and try to use this longitudinal survey, these surveys that have been ongoing and working hard to find people and what that can tell us about our linkage.
So before you move on, I want to ask Tim's question there, which is, if you cannot pick a name, can you digitally compare bad signatures across censuses to make more links using just the signatures themselves without triangulating to the composite file that you mentioned?
I mean, I don't know that. I had not thought of that. We definitely, again, we'll try to use the recovered names. signatures are hard too. So like, or the handwriting. So I've obviously looked at these. I looked at my family, like I'm allowed to do that. And like my dad filled the family out in 2000, and my mom did in 90, right? And then my stepdad did in 2000. And like my story on my stepdad is he got my mom's birth date wrong. He still gets it wrong, I guess. So like that's a piece of it too. So it's not exactly like their own signature, right? It's like whoever is filling out a signature for your household. So I mean, the data is there. That's the other big, like, beautiful piece of all of this is that like we are creating these data and then we have them, right? The archives has them. We have that, like we have these data and like they could be available to use. Now the amount of work we're doing to like process this through the cloud and across a ton of servers and try and capture this information is so large, it's hard to imagine again. That said, like all of this would have been hard to imagine a decade ago. So I think there's a future too, where potentially someone does a better job than we do. I hope so. And this is great that there are questions, and I'm totally happy to do them. Everyone has seen this 100 times. You can see here, I put 2026 here, expected longitudinal infrastructure. I'm making a lot of like, expectation going on here. There's some pretty big error bars around it, including even like the 2020 decennial and whatnot, right? They're big error bars. But basically, right, we hope that these will be creating this backbone and like going in, and that any scholar, researcher that can access, and even these data are census data from their home, work virtually to use many of these data linked together to do research. And that's very exciting. These are the FSRDCs, your physical locations. Again, this is all census data. That's also the beauty of it. I mean, it's huge, right? They're gorgeous, and it's sort of, I'm hoping it opens up some doors that are otherwise currently only possible using text data, and to study things like intergenerational mobility and change and exposure and later life outcomes. So it's very exciting in that way.
Katie, when we started this project, we
Do that one.
Internally called it CLIP, the Census Longitudinal Linkage Project or Infrastructure Project. And back then, anybody that wanted to use it was going to have to go ask this executive board at Census every single time. Had that normalized at all? Can people now
anyone at this, that changed in 2018? The Census Bureau changed their sort of policy on external researchers accessing linked, what we call mandatory response data, which is your census or your ACS, where you're required by law to do it. And basically through the CLIP project, the 10 pilot projects, most of which have finished and been very successful, we were able to show how good researchers are, right? And how they treat the data really securely, and that really important research can come out of this. So now anyone can request the use of these data, any of these data linked together, and go through the normal FSRDC process. I've seen a lot of them come through, and as I said, there's some really, oh God, there's such cool stuff going on. It's just really exciting. And that's part of the reason that it's made this possible. I mean, I think being able to secure funding in this way, in part to support, sort of the big research where people want to link this stuff to anything, but also the fact that anyone, NSF has really said it, that any single person can come in and get access to these data through the RDC. And that, with the push with COVID, that that we believe these data will be available virtually for people, that they can do it from their home using, because it is just census data, as long as they're, depending on what other data they're using with it. But I do think, it made a huge difference. It really made this possible. So the original CLIP pilots and CLIP project are part of the reason this is possible too, because it showed it was we as a community, I think, could be serious and do this well.
So I want to hop in with Ann Carson's question about the variables that you are pulling in here. And she's pointing out, will census deal with the requirements of the Evidence Act if some of the data sources are considered more restricted than others? And also, I'm really excited to hear you say that it's there to be requested, and it is one of the assets available. But as an RDC director, there is very poor data discovery about this. So I wanted to pull into something that Ann said about the requirements of the Evidence Act, which would be to make sure that this is included in the data inventory, and that it was selectable through the standard application process and all of the other evidence things. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely the plan. I mean, it will be discoverable like anything else. Another byproduct of this project is that we have like pretty high data documentation standards. I mean, personally, I think anyone, like I've done a lot of work to try and document what's in the census data and what's in administrative data. I think it's a huge part of this project that will come out of this with really great documentation. And that this is right, absolutely, like we'll work, this will be selectable, anyone can do this. I mean, and I definitely see people applying because I see their applicants doing it now with what's there with 40 and with 2000 and 2010 in the ACS. And I think that'll just expand. We also have some further dissemination plans that we've got funding for to do some more trainings to sort of help people use this to develop code to facilitate the use of it. So particularly through our NSF grant, we've really pushed that once these data are some of them are available and stuff, that we'll really be working to also get them in the hands of people that don't always have them. So I mean, I do think not just an FSRDC thing, but anyone with big data is hard. Using data is hard. Using census data is hard. Using administrative data is difficult for anyone. And that we were going to work really hard to create an inclusive data community that's using that. Ideally that we'll have it at tons of organizations and institutions throughout the country where people can use these data.
I want to ask Lorelai's question before I get to AB's hard question. She says, do you know if the data is going to be sortable by shapefile so that someone could use this for congressional districts? And she points out that you could use this to do an institutional history of legislation by geography and constituency. It would be really useful. It would help you understand polarization. And also points out that Congress is standing up a digital service right now. And I'm so excited. That was such good news to see recently as part of modernization. So is this going to pop out just as there's some SAS files over there? Or are you guys going to have things that permit more easy spatial analysis?
So was that the easy question, Amy? That's not very easy.
That was the easy question. Wait until you see the next one.
Okay, so here's what so spatial stuff in general. So right now, all of these microdata available within the RDCs have the census geographies in them, right? The difficult thing, my understanding, I am not a geographer, a spatial analyst, but I hang out occasionally with mostly on the harmonization side. And my understanding is going back, we don't always have the GIS files this far, and the maps have not all been digitized. And there's huge amounts of paper maps at the Census Bureau, some of which are being digitized. We're not doing this as a part of this project. I don't have the funding for that, but it's something on our minds. And definitely, the data the microdata already in there, right? They have the same geography that they're going to have once they have pick crosswalks available to them. Kind of related. So I don't have much on we're not going to be producing new estimates at any geographic levels under this project. That doesn't mean it won't happen at some point or someone else isn't or something. I will also say we have proposed with these data to make synthetic samples of the data, sort of like the PUMs, right? Like how you go to the PUMs, if you want to go use the internal data and you can work with the PUMs and see how it'll work. And with the actual variable names and the accurate metadata, so that researchers could actually use the linked data in a setting on their own computer, right? Like using Stata on their own computer or using SAS and figuring it out themselves before coming into the RDC. So that is one of the goals of the project. Again, we're trying to make this easier to use and make some things come out of it that are easier, not really related to geography.
Okay, hard question. And if he didn't ask, someone would have. This is, oh my gosh, I lost it in my chat. Hang on. Do you have a way to quantify uncertainty in the links you generate so that subsequent analyses can incorporate the uncertainty in the links?
Yep, we are working on that. So our hope with using the PSID is one way that we're going to be quantifying the uncertainty and linkage. So I should talk about there's two parts of uncertainty, right? So there's our OCR part that we can be putting the names and the error in wrong or the name capture. And then there is the linkage part, right? There's error and linkage. So I'm going to go backwards. So the linkage piece, right? Is so once we have these things, we are going to be using the PSID to try and calculate error, and we're going to try and use the 2000 census. So basically, we did this for 1942, where we we try to make the 2000 census look like 1960 or make it look like 1970, and then apply our linkage strategies to that and see what happens and get an error estimate on that. So we're going to try to give an error estimate with our linkage generally. And potentially at the individual level too, we've talked about what that means, how providing more information on these, especially as we sort of expand our linkage even beyond sort of the typical production. Census linkage is how to quantify how confident we are in a link, right? So that's on our radar. Going back a step on the OCR is that in fact we have, so in our previous OCR work, we did write sort of confidence scores with that, with how well the OCR works. And we've estimated error sort of with our truth data. And we plan to do both of those things again. So again, trying to come up with, which is sort of what I'm saying at the individual level and then the group, understanding where and what and when we have our biggest gaps. And so we do have like a QA process to planned out and looking at this test data and trying to see, quantify how we're doing. And that's what we hope to give to researchers that can then help when they use the data in research. In general, what I find, and as a researcher myself, like some researchers are clearly more sophisticated and get really into that. And then I think the majority of us are like, nah, if it's over this threshold, I just take it as a link and I'm done. I'm totally like suspect of that, right? I'm like most of the people I work with want to say like these two people are hooked together.
I was suspect when you put up the number from the 1990 pics. I was like.
So at any rate, I hope that helps on that one.
A couple other questions. This is just getting a little bit, you had mentioned that you guys are considering doing the synthetic PUMs. Would that be like synthetic data, capital S, capital D, like other parts of census are exploring, or?
No, that wouldn't be synthetic data of formal synthetic data where then we run it or something like this. We've actually, we think more about this as like a practice data set. And that it's fake, it's synthetic, and that it's not from there, but looking the same with the same things, like hosted at ICPSR that you could download and use. So more like a, like with metadata, with an addition to metadata, but no, not capital synthetic.
Okay. Terry Ann asked a very long question. I would like it. Can you see the chat?
I can look, yeah.
I'm happy to read it.
I wasn't because I was looking at you. Wait, let's see.
She's asking, how will, if you had to tell Congress why this is useful, how would you answer? The practical policy implications.
The practical policy implications. I mean, I think, right, these data are going to allow scholars, researchers, policymakers across all fields of social science and policy and health have a lens of understanding intergenerational and lifetime impacts of policies like never before. I mean, I think this is transformational research. This is going to create transformational research. The building of this infrastructure is going to change our understanding of processes that have gone on for the past 100 years in the US. That's what I think. I truly believe that. That's not like my line. Obviously, I'm stumbling through it, so it's off the top of my head. But like I do believe, and I think I am not the first to say this. People have been, I found actually, oh gosh, so cute. In the 1950, I think it was the February 1950 Census Bulletin to the census staff members, they talked about building a new survey to understand occupational mobility. And that's what we are finally doing, right? Or that's what this is doing based on data we already have, is we're also using, right? It feels expensive. That's what I think we are doing this basically on the cheap, that we have invested millions and billions of dollars in these data. And for a small amount on top of that, we are going to change social science.
Lorelei gave you a suggestion saying that you could say that it helps census fulfill its constitutional responsibilities, which is great. While you're still looking at the chat, could you look at Andy Beveridge's question? Statement?
Over time, that one, or mapped them all, great.
So are you looking for these other streams of information, or do you have enough on your plate with what's on your slide right here?
Correct.
Are you looking for suggestions?
No, I'm not looking for any suggestions. Personally, no, I don't need any feedback. Obviously, we're looking for feedback and we want these data to be useful and good. And I love that in that sort of feedback. In terms of new projects or what we're adding on, this is sort of the bulk of it right now. I have some other, as I said, we're working on 1940, another set of names. We're going to bring in 1950 to this. There are some other small data sets. I'm working with National Archives on a few others that we're trying to digitize and get linked into this that we think can be really useful for scholars. So there's a number of ongoing things like that, but yeah, anyone can do this too. This data is going to be there for everyone. You guys can take it and run.
Great. There was another question in the chat, and this is probably pulling back to your, also to your Minnesota work, that is, hang on one second. Could you talk about the challenges of linking women in historical censuses and how this project is like a radical improvement over the fact that many of the other projects were like just looking at men?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think in general, I think there's, I'm going to answer that in two ways. Like, first of all, I think in thinking about research right now, looking at occupational mobility, looking at, intergenerational mobility, it's primarily is men. And that's because of the linkage issues and because it's a little cleaner. Women are harder, they're generally harder because of marriage. Like these old ones, when I started looking back in time at occupational mobility, they would look at marriage mobility for women, like their spouses, right? This is like sociologists, like back in the 60s and stuff, like like how if you're moving up through marriage, because that was sort of the option. So women also have presented this more difficult thing because of fertility and marriage and not all working. And I think men are just an easier beginning to look at. This is what I like to think, that this is the beginning, that we're coming into the era of when we get to look at women. And that's exactly in part because of this. So I had some previous work linking those historical surveys, trying to find women over time. And it's fine if you're only looking at single women that never marry. It's right. It's those last names that get really tough. The very nice thing is that with the SSA Numidant, we have women's birth names, or what people call maiden names, so birth name, and their married name often. So that's really in part why we can get higher linkage rates for women. And I think this is that's one area where this is going to be transformational, is actually understanding processes over time for women and not just for men.
That's great. There is a question in the chat about whether you're matching to CMS data. I clarified that it's the Medicare and Medicaid enrollment file. It is not the chronic conditions warehouse. It is not claims. And then AB asked a question that I'm putting my own take on it, but asking about matching to the National Death Index. So whenever you're looking to see if individuals are deceased, because there are certain outcomes that people are really caring about here, it's employment and earnings and mobility and death. But are you still using the fact of death from the Social Security file, or is there any chatter about potentially going to the NDI to look at cause and manner?
I don't know if that, it doesn't mean there's not. I don't know of any like chatter about the NDI, other than we do have some samples linked to the NDI at the census that are available for people. And I also should mention too that we think that for all cause mortality, the Numidant file is very, very high quality, and that it sort of has gotten better and better over time. And that, so I think it is a really valuable resource that's probably underused at this point. And we're hoping that that will be useful for people too. I think that is a big, like when you're thinking about research and grants, I think one of the big places sort of on this, on the screen right now that we're seeing is, when people are talking about other clinical data or things, bringing in health data is going to be that's a big piece of it.
Okay, despite your talking really fast, we have reached the top of the hour. And for anybody that has to hop off, I want to thank you very much for joining us. And we are going to ask you for your slides, and we're going to put up the talk on our website. And if people have more questions about this project, does it have a website, or should they just contact
throw them into the ether? There's no place to go. Well, first and foremost, if you have specific questions for me, you're always welcome to reach out. I'm notorious for like spending nights helping people try to get access to RDC data. It's sad how much joy it brings me, but I feel like in these past 2 years of trying to figure out what all of us trying to, like people quitting their jobs and whatnot, I've realized a lot of my joy comes from helping people access data and think about their own research projects with the data. So I love that. Questions about the project, you're always welcome to reach out to Trent or I. We are working on getting our web presence down. We've been really busy just trying to get this going. And sadly, that's one of the things that's sort of fallen on the bottom. But we hope to have like up-to-date trackers too on how we're making progress and things like that online. We're working on those right now.
It'll be ready 5 years from someday.
That's right. 5 years from someday, it'll be ready. And it will be ready. And it's amazing. It's big, it's massive.
It is massive. Katie, thank you so much for sharing this. Looking forward to seeing how it evolves, and maybe we'll invite you back so you can give us an update and tell us, give us the little countdown clock for.
Yeah, that would be That would be fantastic.
Great.
Maybe someday we'll see you and others on this. It's so fun to see your names. Hopefully we can see you in person soon. That's the other piece.
Someday. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. See you next month.